Welcome back to He's a Giant, the pod about all things college football and all things Giants football. I'm your host, Sal, with my co-host, Monty. What's going on, man?
What's going on, Sal? Just watching some of this Thursday night football game. Praying that I can make it to the next round of my fantasy league. How you doing?
I'm good. I was watching the beatdown that Matt Stafford was laying on the team that just laid a beatdown on us a few days ago before
Yeah,
we
we play
started
them in
here.
a couple weeks here.
They got a little mini bye before they get to rest up, stretch a little bit before they
Yeah,
come into town. Giants
fun,
have the
fun.
Eagles. Yeah, the Giants have the Eagles on Christmas Day. That should be fun. And then they've got the Rams on short rest. We'll get to that. Today's episode is our mailbag episode. So we've gone through all sorts of stuff with college football. We've done our state of the Giants breakdown. Today we're just going to try to answer some questions from some of our loyal listeners. We appreciate you guys. Before we get started, remember to follow us. Follow us at He's a Giant Pod on Twitter /X. Follow me at Queens_guy. Follow Monty at Monte Cristo at MONTECRI5TO. And make sure to subscribe to our pod if you like what you're hearing. We're on YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Like, subscribe, 5 stars, all the things that help us grow. We appreciate you guys. Let's get into it. Unless you want to go into some other Giant stuff. There's not a whole heck of a lot going on in Giants world right now.
Yeah, no, not a whole lot. We lost to the Saints, like you mentioned, and the Tommy DeVito fun seems to be about over. Going to the Eagles, Rams, Eagles. So I think we're on the draft season. I think that's where everybody is. There's the little bit of hope of playoffs. I don't think me and you at least didn't really see that as something that's going to happen. But it was still possible. Now it's pretty much impossible. I think everyone's kind of moved
It's
their
not
mind to being like,
impossible. There's an approximate 0.2% chance.
there you go.
It's not impossible.
So you're saying
Uh,
there's a chance.
I'm saying there's a chance. Um, yeah, now it's just a matter of where do we land? Where do we
Yep.
land on the draft board? And that's going to depend on what the Giants do and what these teams around them do. So just kind of sit back and watch how the last few weeks play out, see what happens, and then we'll get into some interesting conversation based on where we landed, because that's when draft season really begins. Is when you know where your team is sitting and who's sitting above them and who's behind them.
We got a couple games this week that are gonna be big. You got Washington versus the Jets. Washington beat the Jets. That'll move us up. If Jets win, at least it takes it away from being a tiebreaker type thing. That'll just move us ahead, even though we're already ahead. And then Cardinals versus Bears. We really want the Bears, I think, to win that one. I mean, especially if Cardinals end up that 2 spot, maybe you have a shot to trade up. So yeah, some interesting games.
Monty holding out hope. You gotta love it.
Just a little bit.
He's holding out hope. We'll get to all that stuff. I'm kind of ready to just see where it lands. But with
Yep.
that, man, do you want to get into this? Get into this mailbag here?
Yeah. So let's get into the first one. First question here. A good friend of mine, Nikki Snacks. After spending so much draft capital on O line, I think it's time to get aggressive in free agency with proven vets. Who are some names to look out for, particularly at the guard position? One of the most, sober, rational questions Nikki Snacks has ever asked. So appreciate it, Snacks.
I don't.
What do you got there, Sal,
I
for
don't.
that
I,
question?
I don't know Nicky Snacks personally, but I know him by reputation, and that this just sounds. Look what the Giants have done. Look what the Giants have done. I'm sorry, man. One day we'll sit down and have a drink together, and we'll try to get you back right. But no, so I agree with Nikki here with Snacks that I do think we're gonna need help in the form of some veterans added to this line, because you can't just keep going into the draft, drafting guys high, throwing them in. We need a lot of help on the online. So let's just start from the beginning. We've been on this, and I think everybody's on this at this point. We can't judge what we're going to do with this O-line till we take the current O-line coach, punt him off the East River, off the bridge into the East River, and get ourselves a new O-line coach. So let's start there. And let's assume that we've got a real O-line coach who knows how to assess our talent. So the first thing I would do is say, hey, tell me what you got, real coach. Tell me what we got in Evan Neal. Is this man a tackle or is he a guard? Because obviously that changes things, right? Because if you got lucky, you got a guy like Munchak, and he took one look at Evan Neal and said, not a tackle. This guy's a guard. I think that changes the way you approach a little bit. But let's assume he says, yeah, that's a tackle. We compiled a list of a few names, free agent and O linemen that I think are worth looking at. So right off the bat, I think the three guys, at least on the interior, that we like are Robert Hunt, who's currently on Miami, Michael Onwenu, who's currently on the Patriots, and Ezra Cleveland, who was traded midseason and is currently on the Jaguars. So, um, solid interior O lineman, with some flexibility, at least for a couple of them, to play some tackle. I think that's how we view these guys. I know you especially like Onwenu, because the guy's he's a fairly dominant guard, but he
Yeah.
can slide over and play right tackle and be very serviceable there. So I think those guys right off the bat are like three guys you would want to go get. What are your thoughts on those first three?
Yeah, man. I mean, those 3 are the ones that immediately pop off the page. I mean, those are 3 that we've been talking about for a while here. With all 3 of them, they have tackle experience, as you've mentioned. So, that's big, especially if you're going in with the plan of Evan Neal playing tackle. Because if he sucks, you have the option of like, all right, this guy's tackle experience. We can knock Neal back inside, move this guy outside, and you get through the season and figure out the right tackle situation next offseason. You have a guy who can work for now. The guys who I really would prefer would be Robert Hunt or Michael Wenwu. Both those guys are dominant guards,
Yeah,
absolute physical freaks. They're both very large humans. Robert Hunt, a lot of Giants fans would love Robert Hunt. Robert Hunt, he has that mauler attitude. He wants to bury you in the dirt. He's a very good in the run protection. He's good in pass protection. I think he is the ideal person to go after. He actually is a Robert Sale guy. He was over at UL Lafayette with him at the time, and he's really developed in the pros here. I'm friends with some Miami Dolphins fans, and they love Robert Hunt. Very big, very high in him. Then Michael Wenwu, he's been dominant since he's a rookie. Really, it's funny because he's had some like ups and downs with the Patriots. He got benched at some point, but like I don't know necessarily what's up with that, but everything indicates he's been like a great player since you walk in this door. He was like an all rookie team type player. He was like PFF's highest ranked guard like a couple years ago, and he's been consistently like good pass protection numbers, good run blocking numbers, all that type of stuff. And he's just a giant. I think he's like 330 pounds. So,
yeah, they
um,
both are. He's 6'3", 350, and
yeah,
Hunt is like 6'6", 350, 6'6", 335 actually.
okay,
So they're both big dudes.
yeah. And then Urza Cleveland, he's not going to get the money that Robert Hunt and Michael Wenwu are going to get. Those guys are easily going to get, I think, like 12 plus million. But
Yeah,
Urza Cleveland will probably come in closer to maybe 8 or 9, and he's a solid player. He's a guy who doesn't dominate necessarily anything, but he's a solid run blocker, a solid pass protector. He has guard tackle flexibility. Um, he's a very athletic player. I think he's young. He's coming off his rookie deal as all these guys that we named are. So he's definitely that next tier for me, but he fits that prototype that we're talking about from the kind of Robert Hunt, Michael Winwood with the guys that have that guard tackle flexibility. So we have some other names too, but do you have anything else on those 3?
no, I think those are like the big three targets in free agency. The one thing I would add about Onwenu, which is so interesting about him, is that the dude he plays like it seems like every year he's playing a different position. He slides from right tackle to right guard to right tackle. Um, and
Left
this year
guard.
he's played left guard. This year he's playing mostly right tackle out of necessity. He's dominant, absolutely dominant at right guard, as you mentioned, both in pass and run blocking. At
Yep.
right tackle, he's really solid. Like he's like a league average right tackle. I mean, he's not bad. He's not dominant,
Played
but he's
well
not
versus
bad.
us there.
Right, and he's a pretty good run blocker no matter where you put him. And I think that's again we've talked about that at right tackle. You want if you're going to err on something, even though it's a passing league, you want that other tackle to at least be a solid, reliable run blocker, and at least or maybe a dominant run blocker and somebody who's at least like reliable and steady at in pass blocking.
Yeah.
So I
I
think
kind of agree with that.
he fits the mold well. I think I would agree. These guys are both young. They're both in the 2020 draft class. This is their first second contract. Hunt was a second round pick, I think, or a third round pick, and then Onwenu was like a sixth round pick out of Michigan.
He was a
They're
steal.
I mean, they're both going to get probably in the what did Chris Lindstrom get last year? Like 18, 20 million or something like that.
He got paid. Let's see. Hang on. Speaking of, I mentioned that I was going to mention we PFF dropped their free agent list, so we were going to look at some of those names off of there. But speaking of, they do have contract predictions, so we can
Oh,
name
okay,
some of
good.
these for these guys. So
All right.
the prediction for Robert Hunt is 4 years, $70 million,
Mhm.
42 million guaranteed, 17.5 million per year. So they're
That
they're
sounds right.
expecting a heavy contract for him, which I think is a spot to invest. I wouldn't hesitate from paying some for that.
What about Unwenu?
And
Probably the
Wenwu, they
same.
have actually listed as a tackle, which makes sense because that's what he's doing this year. They have 4 years, 58 million, 33.25 guaranteed, 14.5 million a year. So that's a little bit more affordable than Robert Hunt, which just makes sense. Robert Hunt is the last couple years has been the better player. Wenwu was better earlier on in his career, but I think I would pay both those. I mean, Wenwu seems like
Yeah.
the better deal at those, but I'd pay either.
It's actually similar, if I recall, to the Mike McGlinchey deal that he got last year to Denver as the right tackle, went from the 49ers to Denver in free agency. I think he got around like somewhere between like 14 and 15 million a year or something along those lines.
And
Um,
it's out while I'm here. Urza Cleveland, they had 3 years, 28.5 million, 9.5 million guaranteed, 17.25 million guaranteed. So right around
yeah.
a little bit under
So
10 million, what I was thinking.
now the premium you're paying for guys like Onwenu and Hunt is a little bit of positional flexibility, I think. Um, I would pay it. I agree with this like premise that you want to invest in these guys. They're young. So the reason we put these guys at the top list, they're all young. They came out in like
Yeah.
they were both like in the 2020 class. Cleveland, I want to say was in the 21 class. I can't remember where exactly, but
I think Cleveland was 20 as well.
was he also 20? Okay.
Mhm.
Um, that's true. He wouldn't be a free agent then. So right. So these guys are all young. They're like 25, 26 years old. They probably have a solid 5 to 7 years left in the NFL. You could give these guys of high level production. I think you give these guys like a 4 or 5 year deal, backload the deals. It's worth investing the money in like one really solid interior lineman who really can play the outside too, play on tackle. I think that would be a strong, smart investment for the Giants to make because there are two big needs that I think we can hit in free agency that would really make draft weekend a lot easier. One is that we've talked about it so many times, this position, right? Like the guard slash tackle flexibility position, a high end guard, a solid tackle type player. The other is pass rusher or
Yep.
probably an edge rusher. So, I mean, I think that's another area we want to get into eventually. But for linemen, I think these are the three guys we would invest money in. So I'd have no problem handing either of those contracts to these guys, backloading the deal, investing in them for 4 to 5 years. Would you have any problem with it?
No, I'll say, like, people are kind of scared with going after offensive lineman free agency because we've been so bad at it. But with the exception of Nate Solder, who was an older player when we signed him in the first place, we've really kind of half-assed free agency at offensive line every step of the way. We've never really invested at the top of the market outside of Solder, and I think that it's well overdue. And I think just doing that once, especially at interior offensive line, where these guys hit the open market way more often than offensive tackles do, I think it's worth doing that. And the one other thing I wanted to say was that, you know, especially with the first two you mentioned, that gives you that guard tackle flexibility. And, you know, what we mentioned, the plan would be you play him at guard and you can move him to tackle if you have to move Neal inside, whatever. And again, assuming Neal's going to play tackle next year, I think, and this kind of leads us into some of the other ones we were talking about. I think the other plan you could go into this with, you could not spend huge money on one guy. You could spend decent money on a guard, decent money on a swing tackle, and being like, you're my starting guard, and you are going to be a swing tackle if either of these guys get hurt or if Evan Neal is just not up for the job. So I think there's some names in this next group of guys where fall into that. So I'll read off some of them that PFF had here. One is Jermaine Elemanor, I think is how you say. He's from the Raiders. He's
Illuminor.
a Illuminor. He's a longtime swing tackle. He's been the right tackle for a couple of years now. A name that all of us know very well. Kevin Zeitler is a free agent this year. Kevin Dotson is a free agent. Damian Lewis, John Runyon, and George Font. So, we can go into some combinations with some of those guys and talk about them in general. But do you have any first thoughts about any of those players?
Yeah, I mean, Illuminor is a guy who's been around the league for a bit. He was on the Ravens, uh, the Raiders now, as you mentioned. He's closing in on 30 years of age pretty soon. Actually, I think he just turned 29. Um, so he's got a lot of experience. He's solid. This year, I was just looking up his stats. He's played 125 snaps at left tackle, 586 at right tackle. So there's your classic swing tackle guy. Lots of snaps, and he's got solid run and pass blocking grades on PFF. Uh, haven't looked into his film recently, but he's been a reliable player. I don't know what they're projecting his salary at. I'm willing to bet it's not a ton.
They
Probably
have it
talking.
at 7.25 million per year.
I mean, that's solid, right? For a guy who can play a swing tackle role, who could be a starter. I think that's a good deal. Um, Zeitler, we all know, he was with the Giants. We cut him to basically, well, we traded him, I guess. In the
No, we
and we
caught him.
traded. Oh, that's right. We cut him after we signed Adoree Jackson, right? Wasn't that the deal?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so basically the money that went to Jackson was taken from Zeitler. He's been really solid since he latched onto the Ravens. He's been their starting guard for years. He's getting a little up there in age, but he's still really solid. I can't imagine he's going to cost a ton to sign at this point in his career. Probably looking at like another $6 million deal.
Yeah, they had 7.5 for him as well for 2 years.
Yeah, I think that's pretty total or per
No,
year.
a year for 2 years, 15.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds about right. Um, Dotson's another guy, same kind of thing. He got traded this year from the Steelers. He's on the Rams. Look how the Rams rebuilt their line so quickly. He's been solid. He won't cost much. So that batch, I think these are your like sort of next level free agents, right? These are like you could take one or two of these guys and basically pay them. So you could come up with a world where you pay, let's say, Zeitler and Illuminor, and you've got your swing tackle and you've got a starting guard, and they're going to both cost about as much as it would have cost to sign like Robert Hunt. So that's
I'll
one way you can look at this.
I'll say I didn't expect Kevin Dotson to be expensive, but PFF, uh, we'll see if they're right, but they had a high prediction on him. They have him as 4 years, 69 million, 17.25 per year. For a guy who I'm looking at these numbers don't look great, like a 73.6
Well,
pass block grade. He's a
I wonder.
15% positive run
Wow,
block grade, good, but
that's a big number.
yeah,
It might be
for a
his
guy who just
age.
got traded because he wasn't doing performing great in Pittsburgh, I mean, I get and now he's in like a zone scheme, which doesn't necessarily fit what we're doing, and maybe they'd be like, "Hey, it was the
I
better
think
fit
it,
for him."
I
But
think we want to run a zone scheme. Our guys just suck at it because
yeah,
they're not well coached. But yeah, I mean he's been a really good run blocker this year. Maybe that's what it's based
yeah,
off of. I'm not sure. Um, that seems a little rich, but if that's true, I would not necessarily invest that kind of money in him. Um,
either.
and I think
That's
for the
it.
next and then you mentioned like the other guy. Did you mention Lewis, Runyon, and Fant yet?
No, I haven't mentioned anything.
Yeah. All right. So like, well, those are kind of the next batch of guys. But I think in this group, the way I would approach it is what you started with. I would, if I'm not paying Nwenu, who I think is worth paying, by the way, because he's young and he's so good.
Yeah, if
But
he
I'm not
shakes
going to.
loose, go after him.
Right. If you're just looking for bodies who are just solid, nothing great, but just solid, reliable, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a solid way to approach the line. I think you sign two of these guys, Illuminor and Zeitler, something like that. Just keeping in mind that Zeitler's not here for the long haul. He might give you a year. If you're lucky, maybe two, and you still have to replace him. You're not getting a long-term solution with these guys, but you're also not investing a lot, so they would be short-term solutions. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think with like Lewis and Runyon, you get like a solid pass protector. Lewis is a little older, but offers a little bit more in run blocking. But I like you said, I think they're solid. Another guy we didn't mention either was George Font. George Font came over to the Texans on a cheap deal. He's an older guy. He's been around the league forever. He was on the Jets before this.
really
I
solid
think
player.
Yeah, I think he signed like a 1 year, $2 million or $3 million deal with the Texans, and he got brought in there, and he's starting now, and he's helped really fix that Texans offensive line. I've actually No, I've compared our offensive line a lot to the situation the Texans were in going into this offseason. You look at the similarities. We both have, that all pro left tackle. We have a tackle we spent a first round pick on who hasn't necessarily lived up to what you would hope he was be, and he might move into guard like they had with Titus Howard. I think that's who it is. I
Yep.
think. And then they have some younger players like Kenyon Green. He's been hurt, but we have John Michael Smith. Along those lines, and they just went out and they got Shaq Mason. They got George Font. They got a couple solid veterans, and boom, they'll got a good quarterback. Fix a couple holes, and their line, their offense, it's cooking now. So
It's a
I
three.
don't think we're that far away from doing something like
It's a three-step process or a three-prong process, right? Number one, you got to get the right O-line coach. None of this matters unless you get the right O-line coach. At this point, you cannot go into next year. You can't even go in the middle of January with Bobby Johnson employed by your team. Like literally, he's got to be handed the pink slip the moment the last like few seconds tick off in that Philadelphia game. Like, and he's got to be out of the building. You need to have your guy in place quickly. I hope they're looking at guys to replace him because they need to move on this. You need to assess your players quickly because free agency starts fast. It'll
that.
start. You only have like after the Super Bowl, you only have a few weeks before the free agency period starts. So you have a few weeks to get your staff in order. Which I mean, we're not going into that today, but like as we discussed, there may be some real shakeup in the Giants coaching staff at the end of the year, and then you got to get all these things sorted out. The scheme you're running, everything you're doing, you've got to assess your own players internally, and you're going to be doing that while those guys are not even in the building. Um, and then you've got a few weeks to decide how are we approaching free agency. So they got to hire someone as soon as possible. I'm hoping Joe Shane's looking at somebody right now.
One thing I'll throw into that too, I've mentioned it on Spaces. I think there's a chance we could end up coaching the Senior Bowl based on how high we're picking and having returning staff. You're gonna want these guys to be working with them at the Senior Bowl, so you got
Right.
to
You
have these
want
guys in place.
right. You got to move quickly to dump these guys that you have currently if you're moving on and get new coaches in. And then the second prong of that is obviously just bring in good talent, either through a combination of free agency and the draft, or just assessing your own guys. And then I think the last part of it, which is where the Texans really benefited, obviously they got their quarterback. You know, best offense. My friend Authentic always says the best offensive lineman is a good quarterback, and I think that's true. A guy who understands his protections and knows how to sense pressure and gets the ball out quickly will make his linemen look better. Doesn't mean they're playing better, but it takes pressure off them.
Yep.
So that's all the stuff we got to do. But I think these are, to kind of round back to the question, I'd invest in one or two of these guys. I would take whatever cap space we got. We don't have a lot of it, but I don't care. Like, just push the damn money back because you should have more next year. So I would definitely go like all in on either one of these top end three guys or two of the mid tier guys. Load up our offensive line with some talent and some depth. Force guys to compete for jobs. So those are the names we're looking at. So just to recap, our top three guys. These are kind of solo hires: Robert Hunt, Michael Nwonu, Ezra Cleveland, and then the next three guys are Jermaine Illuminor, Kevin Zeitler, Kevin Dotson, who might be a little bit too pricey, and then Damian Lewis, John Runyon, George Fant. Some combination of these guys, I think, would really go a long way at solidifying our line.
And one thing I'll mention to like what you said, kind of where pushing the money back is if you get like a Robert Hunt or a Mike Owenwu, their cap hit in the first year is going to be like 7-8 million. If you're getting a Kevin Zeitler or something, that cap hit's still probably going to be like 5-6
Because it's a short term
million.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah, while you can do like a 5-year deal with Robert Hunt and you can make that money basically be the same over the first year.
There is definitely value in going after one of the big guys here. Like a Hunt or an one who go a long way towards fixing your line. And they should be a top priority for Joe Shane. I mean, every team needs help, but the Giants really need help. So they got to be looking at this. I think they do free up like, I don't know, $6 or $7 million in cap space when they're going to cut Mark Lewinsky inevitably. So that's going to help. That money right there is going to help pay for one of these guys. All right, you want to go on to question number two?
Yep. Why don't you go ahead and read it off?
All right, this question comes from our buddy Chris Calate. Can you guys look into Chris Braswell, edge linebacker from Alabama? I want your guys' opinion on him and see how he fits into a wink defense. So why don't you handle that, Monty?
Yep. So shout out Chris. I met Chris at the Patriots game, Talking Giants tailgate. So thanks for asking the question, Chris. This was something that I was kind of hoping somebody would ask about, or at least we'd have an excuse to go into a little bit. I was hoping we'd have an option to get this guy in our 7 round mock draft, and so we could talk about him a little more. So happy to have the opportunity here. Chris Braswell is a guy I'm really interested in. Uh, I think that there's going to be an opportunity to get an edge rusher at the beginning of the second round, but it's hard to identify who that might be. We have another question coming up to go into the top edge rushers a little bit more, but I don't know if any of those top 5 guys will be there in the second round. So now I'm kind of looking at Chris Braswell as the 6th guy, and he's had a really productive year. But before we go into any of that, I just want to kind of go into the measurables here because that's a spot that's going to make him jump off boards and make him really like get on everybody's radar. For anybody who reads it, Bruce Feldman does the freak list every single year, and he was number 7 on the freak list. He's 6'3", 256 pounds. He has a 38.5-inch vertical. He runs a 21.9 mile per hour on the GPS. He has a 405 bench press, a 405 hang clean. He squats 705 pounds. Guy is just an absolute total freak. So, Chris Braswell is somebody who I think is going to fly up boards and has a ton of upside. Why don't you go a little bit into some of Chris Braswell's game?
We love this guy. So he was somebody that we didn't get into in our initial review of edge rushers. He just kind of fell outside of our top like 5 guys and our 2 sleepers. But this is a dude who really came onto the scene this year. And I'm assuming, Chris, this is why you're asking the question. So last year, the edge room at Alabama was Will Anderson, who obviously went number 3 overall in the draft to the Texans. And then he had Dallas Turner on the other side, who was really kind of a limited pass rusher. He was more of just like a speed guy, right? And not a whole lot else. So Turner took the Will Anderson role this year, and we'll get to him eventually. But Turner basically took all his athletic traits and became just a well-rounded freak, um, dominant player. But interestingly enough, whether that's because of Turner or just because this guy got really good all of a sudden himself, Braswell, Monty just mentioned he's an athletic freak. He had an insane year this year. So I'll go through some of his data. He had an 88.6 pass rush grade on PFF. That is extraordinarily high, just behind Dallas Turner, who is 89.9. And Dallas Turner is, he's kind of being viewed as like somewhere between edge 1 and edge 3 of this class, depending on who you talk to. Production-wise, he had more pressures than Turner. Turner had 52 total pressures this year. Braswell had 54. Turner had 10 sacks. Braswell had 13. 13 sacks is nuts in a 13-game sample in college. And his pass rush win rate, which is, we use that number to try to predict how they would do in like pass sets and, try to predict NFL success. Anything above 20% is considered elite. That's what like the top guys, like the Nick Bosa's do. Micah, why am I forgetting this idiot's name? Micah Parsons. Yeah. Sorry, Micah Parsons. These guys are in the 20s. Dallas Turner is at 20.4%. The top guys in this class are above 20%. But Chris Braswell's right behind them at 18.5%. So the data loves the guy, right? The data is telling you he gets a ton of pressures. He wins pass rush moves. He generates a lot of quarterback hits. He's an outstanding pass rusher. His run defense leaves a little bit more to be desired. He's not as well-rounded as Dallas Turner as a run defender, and he doesn't have as much of a versatile game. But he's still pretty good. When you look at Chris Braswell in the film, the things that hop out are a couple of things. One, the guy has an explosive first step, and he really is like explosive. He generates a lot of speed and velocity and power with that first step. and then he takes that, converts it speed to power, and boom, and he jolts tackles backwards, and that's kind of it. Like that's his
Yeah.
move, right? Like he's sort of he's winning with just that. He's winning with speed to power at the college game. The question is, can he do that at the NFL level? He's going to have to develop a more versatile like repertoire of counter moves, spin moves, rip moves, the stuff that these guys have to win with at the NFL level. So that's I think the pros and the cons of Braswell are basically the pros are he's highly productive. The data loves him, and the predictive data that says he should be a good player at the NFL level, all is in his favor, including his athletic profile. The 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 cons are really just he has a limited repertoire as a pass rusher. He's winning with essentially a singular move, which may work even in the SEC, but in the NFL, when you're facing some big boys, they can absorb that blow and just toss you to the side unless you have a counter move.
Yeah. And, it's going to depend on the tackle you're going against. Some tackles in the NFL, they'll work really well, but other games, if you don't have another move, you're going to get shut out. Uh, but yeah, and I like Braswell. And, I was watching some of the tape today on him to kind of, get a better idea of it. And you kind of nailed it. Really explosive first step. Like I said, with speed to power. And he has this one move that he really, I mean, he has his bull rush, but another move he uses a lot. He takes the one arm, he extends the lineman, kind of gets him onto one foot, runs the power, and kind of tosses him. I was saying to you earlier, it kind of reminds me of a move that like Michael Strahan used to live and die by. He used to, extend that arm out, get that lineman on one foot, and kind of just chuck him to the side. You kind of have a little bit of that from Braswell. Obviously, not as advanced as Strahan had it, but it reminded me of it a little bit. Um, he has incredible closing speed. That's not surprising with kind of athlete he is. Once he kind of has the quarterbacks in his sights, he'll close on them fast. Yeah, but like you said, he needs to add more moves to his game. He's not the most bendy guy. Kind of looks a little bit stiff, so he's gonna have to work with that. But
So
he,
here's where he's interesting because Chris asked, how does he fit in a wing system? I don't know how versatile he is for a wing system, honestly. Like I think this guy he's actually if we get a guy like Frazier, and I'm not thrilled about that idea, even though I think he's a good coordinator. But if you have a guy like Frazier who runs a lot of 4-3 sets, I think this guy could be a good 4-3 defensive end, because those guys are much more of the true speed to power kind of, power line, interior, I mean, defensive ends and defensive linemen. I think he could actually do well in that role in the NFL as sort of like the second guy behind Kayvon Thibodeau. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that would be a really good spot for him. But I will make the case for him in a wing system, and this is why. Because last year at Alabama, this is where I'll make for it. Last year at Alabama, their main sets were Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. And then Chris Braswell came in, he kind of ran that cheetah role, I think is what they call it at Alabama. And he was kind of that third edge rusher who would come in there and would blitz and rush. And I think he showed a little bit of his versatility to kind of add to that pass rushing room. And he obviously is the athlete. He obviously has a ton of athleticism and size and speed to be kind of moved around. But I do agree with you. I think he would fit a 4-3 defensive end really well, despite him not being like a 280-pound type guy. I think he could play standing up, or he could play with his hand in the dirt.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of that stuff, like he's 6'3", he's 256 now. I mean, you would imagine in the NFL he's going to play around 265, something like that, right? I mean, that's plenty. He's plenty big, plenty strong for that position, and he's strong,
100%.
and he plays strong. Like, I don't think there's any lack of power in the guy's game.
No, no,
So,
no, no. Ton of
so yeah. So I like him. Do I view him as an edge one? I don't think so. I think he falls just below that category. I think he's projectable and could become that with a lot of work. But I think, depending on who his coach is, I think at minimum this guy's a really solid edge too, who can get to the passer and help. But I don't think he's the well-rounded tree of a pass rusher and edge rusher like that Kayvon Thibodeau is. He's not quite at that level.
At least not today. He does,
Not yet.
he does have the athleticism, and I'll say to it, like Dallas Turner was looked and still was looked at the guy going into season to be the guy. but I mean, he outproduced them. Like 13 sacks, incredibly impressive. More pressures, not by a lot, but like he outproduced them by a little bit. And I'm sure Dallas Turner being so talented helped him, and he helped Dallas Turner as well. But so I don't know. Like I agree with you, but there's clearly a high ceiling for Braswell, purely based off how young he is and his athletic upside.
And getting back to the last question about using free agency to assist developing your roster, I think this is where you and I definitely see eye to eye on this. This is a strong defensive free agency class. And there's some really good interior alignment and some of the guys that I think the Giants could need. And I think, on the O-line side, we should be investing, but we definitely should be investing on the defensive side in free agency, in my opinion. Like we should at least look really hard at some of the guys coming out, try to get our hands on one of these pass rushers because while this while this edge room is solid in the draft class, like adding one of these difference makers on defense could really go a long way. And not only making the defense better, but making the draft so much easier to navigate. But if we don't have that guy and we're looking for an edge rusher and we're looking on day two, which is probably where we should be looking for an edge rusher, most likely, early day two. I think Braswell is going to be right in that range. I imagine he's probably going to land. We haven't seen, obviously, Brugler's list hasn't come out yet, but I'm guessing Braswell's going to land with like one of those borderline one round two grades. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he'll be right there around that like 32 mark. He's a talented player, and he's somebody who come off the board before us round two even. It wouldn't surprise me if like a guy like Braylon Trice, who's a little bit older and less athletic, that he ends up going above him. That's the worry, man. That's why I agree approaching some free agency and getting that need knocked out of the way, because we're gonna go into this a little bit in the next question, but it's a good edge class, but it could start to dry up fast.
And the Giants don't need an edge one. I mean, let's be real. Like Kayvon Thibodeau is our edge one, and he's not perfect and he's not fully developed yet, but he's pretty damn good, and he's developing into that. So we don't really need to like hit a home run, on edge one. It would be great if we can get another one of those guys, but I think if you add a really solid guy or an established pass rusher in free agency, it definitely takes the pressure off because if you really want an edge one in this class, and there's some really good ones, and that's going to segue nicely into the next question. You probably got to hit them up in the first 15 picks, right? Somewhere in that range.
Yep.
Maybe top 20 at worst. So um, I think that's it on Braswell. Why don't you read the next question and we'll just segue right into that.
Yeah. So great transition to the next question. And questions by J Coops 7900. He goes, "Are we potentially overlooking some edge studs in Dallas Turner, Letu Latu, uh, Jared Verse, or is this not a dominant edge class?" So,
So Jake, yeah, thank you for the
your thoughts?
question, Jacob. We're definitely not overlooking those guys. If you listen to our Edge series earlier in the year, those guys were all in our top five list. And no, this is not a deep edge class, is how I would describe it. I don't think the depth in this edge class is as much relative to the other positions. There are other positions where it will go like 3, 4 rounds deep. But the top end of this class, meaning like the top 5 to 7 guys, are dominant. And at least these top three guys are very dominant. So I would say that I wouldn't say we're overlooking them. And we'll talk about them one by one, but I would just say that where the Giants' overall roster needs are, and already having invested a pick in Kayvon Thibodeau just 2 years ago, I'm not sure that I would expect them to go and spend an early first round pick, which is what you're going to need to spend on one of these guys on Turner, Latu, and Verse. What do you think, Monty?
Yeah, man, it's an interesting thing with the edge class because it's top heavy, but without really blue chippers. It's
Yeah,
a weird thing where there is probably 5 guys, maybe 4, that I could all see go top 10. Like any one of those, it wouldn't shock me top 10. I just don't think any one of them are like a clear number 1 in any class type of guy.
yeah. There's no Will Anderson in this class. There's
No.
no, yeah,
So, but to go into it a little bit, it's that's a thing. You could rank these guys in any order you want. So I'll just kind of give you our top 5 here, and I'm not even gonna rank it. Just, you mentioned Dallas Turner, Latu Latu, Jared Verse. I'm gonna throw Chop Robinson and Braylon Trice in there. Those are
Yep.
like 5 studs, and we just mentioned Chris Braswell, who I think is gonna, put himself into the end of that conversation. He isn't a guy who could play himself in the top 10. Probably not Braylon Trice, just based off of age and athleticism. But at least those first 4, any one of those guys could be the edge one off this board. Would not shock me even a little bit.
Yeah. So we should go one by one since he asked specifically about these three, who I would agree these are your top three for sure. Like any way you slice it, these are your top three guys.
I'll throw Chop Robinson in there too.
He's worth having a conversation about. I think there are aspects of Chop Robinson's game and his profile that will probably slide him below these guys, namely his size and his lack of a repertoire. I
Yeah.
think he's a speed athletic freak guy and he's small, and I think that that's where he wins. But again, you got to wonder about that versus relative to these guys. So Dallas Turner, he's got the total package. I think if you were looking at anybody and saying, I'm going to create an edge rusher in a lab out of this class, and you try to put all the ingredients and you get out Dallas Turner, right? He's the
Especially for
athletic
wing.
freak. Yeah. He can turn and run in coverage. He can rush the passer. He can win from a 3-point stance. He can win standing up. He can win with power. He can win with speed. He has developed a very versatile pass rushing arsenal, which he didn't have last year, and he put it together this year, right? All sorts of spin moves and swim moves and chops, and he's got a nice repertoire as a pass rusher now. And something anybody who's been watching him play this year has noticed is the guy plays like a sociopath. I mean, he's out
Yeah.
there looking to he's out there looking to do damage, and you want guys like that on your team.
If you watch him versus LSU, he's going after Jaden Daniels, shoving
He
his face in the dirt after plays.
Yeah, he's a mean bastard. Like he plays the game with an edge, and he pun intended. But Dallas Turner is a difference maker. I would say he may not be like an elite kind of prospect, but he's a difference maker. You put him on any team, and he's going to immediately change not just the talent level of your edge room and your defense, but he's going to change the attitude. I think he plays a certain way that I think tends to be infectious, and guys play with it with like a nastiness because of a guy like him. So I would love a guy like him. Um, I think from an all-around standpoint, Laiatu Latu is the best edge rusher right now in this class. He does everything well. Um, I know he's your guy. You loved him more than I did in the summer. So I mean, what are your thoughts on Latu this year and his overall profile?
Yeah, man. I mean, there's not a guy that could have like lived up to my hopes more in Latu Latu. I mean, he was a guy who last year, he had 12 sacks. He, come first year coming back from a medical retirement, and that's the part to worry about him. But had a very productive year and hit all those numbers, the pass rush win rate, and looked projectable that he was going to take the next step. Hell, did he? I mean, like, read off some of these numbers. He had a 96.4 PFF grade. That's like an all-time type grade. 94.4 pass rush grade. 94.8 pass set pass rush grades, only in pass sets. A 24.7 pass rush win rate. That's like a quarter of the time he was winning on pass rushes. 81.9 run defense grade. So his run defense grade is still up there. He had 15 sacks this year. I mean, this dude, at what is he? He was 6'5, 265. He's a big dude. He might not be the most athletic guy in the world, but he's a good enough athlete. He's definitely a plus athlete, but he has every move in the book. He has every pass rush move out there. He goes back to that toolbox and will bring it to every single rush and change it up, and he has a good plan. This guy is as technically sound of an edge prospect as I might have ever seen. Um, the issue is really just that he's medically retired at one point, coming out of Washington. He medically retired in 2021. Played again in 2022, and it was a neck thing. It's concerning. He's not the greatest athlete in the world. He's not bad by any means, but he's not like Dallas Turner special. But if it wasn't for the medical thing, it's not the athleticism that would have a problem. This guy would be a blue chip for me, but I can't do it with history. What about you?
I think if Latu didn't have the medical retirement, he's sort of a slam dunk top 10 pick. I wouldn't say top five in this particular class because I don't think any of these guys are breaking top five in this class. But top 10, yes. I'm not sure he's going in the top 10 just because of that history. Um, I think this is a guy who I don't think he's going to fall like too far, but he's going to fall further than he should because of his medical history. So I wouldn't be surprised if out of all these guys, he's the last one drafted. Um, I would take a swing on him potentially, depending on where he is, but I still think it's going to end up being too high for the Giants. Do I think we're like underestimating him? No, I think you put Latu on the Giants or any other team, he's a dominant pass rusher. He's a dominant player. He's good against the run. He's good against the pass. He does everything well. I mean, he's a great player. The medical stuff is going to scare people off, but I wouldn't be too afraid because he's played. Obviously, they're going to review this guy's medicals at the combine. They're going to go through his history. If he passes the test, hopefully he's on their board and they'd consider him. I'd be thrilled to have the guy on the team. But again, even though he's going to fall, I think he's going to be a little bit too rich for our blood, considering our needs. What do you think?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's it's just I mean, if you can get into range in the second round, he gets to 20s or something, I'd be willing to move up, but I don't think he's gonna make it that far.
Uh,
But I
mi-
don't know.
I, he's going to be in the mid-teens. I think. Like I don't.
Yeah,
I think he's going to be. I think he's the kind of guy like everybody's looking at him and saying, if it wasn't for the medical stuff, I would have taken him an 8 or 7 or
yeah.
something like that in this class. And he's going to drift down the board, and somebody eventually, like in the mid-teens, is going to be like, "There's no way I'm taking somebody else over this guy right now."
Just like
Um,
Jalen Phillips, and he's
yeah,
better than Jalen Phillips.
I think Phillips went 19 or
Yeah.
something like that, or 18 or 19 or something like that. So it'll be something like that. But whoever gets him is going to get a great pass rusher, a great edge rusher. Um, the other guy on the list, Jared Verse, was our consensus one starting the season. He hasn't really played worse than you expected. I think some of these guys just raised their game and kind of caught up to him. Um, so he's, Jared Verse. I'll go through his stuff. Just as a reminder, this is the guy who was a 0-star recruit at Albany, weighed 220 pounds during his COVID year, built a home gym, stacked on 40 pounds of muscle, ends up having a dominant year, transferring to Florida State, is ridiculous in his 2022 season. Would have easily been edge two in the class last year behind Will Anderson, ahead of Tyree Wilson. Decided to go back to school to Florida State, played another year, took a chance, had another solid year. His PFF grade overall, his pass rush grade was 90.5. His run defense grade was 94.0. The guy had 60 total pressures, 11 sacks, and he had a pass rush win rate of 20.8%. So just dominant again. Um, I think he looks a little bit of the luster came off because some of the other guys caught up to him. But for the most part, this is a guy who's got the total package. Wouldn't you say? Similar to Turner, he does everything. He's fast. He's powerful. He's got powerful hands. Um, Great spin move. He's got a good repertoire. He's an advanced pass rusher. Can drop into coverage. He's a great fluid athlete. Like this is a guy I think will go ahead of Latu. Honestly, on draft day.
Yeah. And yeah, it's tough. Like again, I could still see him being the number one. It's just he's not the freak athlete like a Dallas Turner or Chop Robinson are. He's closer to like a Latu as like an athlete. Still very good, just not freak. He's a technician. You compare him a lot to Latu, honestly, in a lot of ways, in healthy ways, just
Mhm.
not quite as dominant as Latu. And I think that's a thing with versus he doesn't like take over games all the time. He does occasionally. I think the last couple games down the stretch versus, Florida and Louisville, that did a lot for putting him back on people's radar. I mean, he had 2.5 sacks for Florida and then had 2 sacks versus Louisville. Before that, he had 9 sacks on the season. Like, I know PFF rounds up half sacks, so like there's officials 9 sacks on the season, and there was 4.5, half of them in the final 2 games of the season. So, like, he kind of popped off at the end, but like you said, like his pass rush win rate's great. His pass rush grade is great. Like, he's getting hurries, he's getting pressures, he's getting to the football. He just wasn't necessarily taking over the football game like you'd expect somebody who went back to college as a guy who probably would have been not even probably would have been a top 10 pick the year before. And he just really didn't take a next step. He looked like he did the year before, better or worse. I don't know, like somewhere around that area. Um, the extra year didn't seem to really help him. He had more snaps and didn't really get better production. So, I like Jared Verse. Do I think he'd be a number one edge in the NFL? Yeah. Do I think that do I see him necessarily as like an all pro? Not as much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I can see him being like a perennial, like Pro Bowl type guy, right? Like
Yeah.
respected around the league by his peers, by coaches. Uh, I think he's the kind of guy that fans of his team are going to love him because of the way he plays football. Um, is he going to be like an all pro? I don't know, maybe second team sometimes, that kind of guy. But that's a really good player. So, yeah, again, this class, I think if you really look at the guys in the group, are they dominant in the way you expect Micah Parsons to be? Mm, maybe not. I think Turner has that potential, certainly. Um, but I think these are really good players at the top of the draft. And listen, if the Giants decide they're going to address this need in the first round, it's not what I would do in the first round, but I think you could do a lot worse than taking any one of these three. But it really probably should be one of these three if you're going to do this in the first round.
Yep. And well, one more I do want to talk about Chop just a little bit to throw him into this conversation because Chop, he does not have the box score production these other guys have. He only had 3 sacks on this year, so obviously not something you want to see out of a top 10 pick. But man, 92.3 pass rush grade, 20.9 pass rush win rate. He's had over a 90 PFF grade 2 years in a row. And this guy is a freak athlete. He's a Feldman freak. He was number 9 on his list. And like some of the things they had on him, he clocked in a 4.47 40-yard dash at 6'3", 250 pounds. He ran a shuttle at 4.22. He broad jumped 10.7. He bench pressed 400 pounds. Like, this guy's going to be a blow up the combine. Yes, he's a little bit shorter at 6'3", but I still got enough height. I think Chop Robinson, just based off his efficiency numbers and based how good of an athlete he is, I think he's going to put himself in the conversation for Edge. I really
I think he'll be in the conversation. I think teams are going to grapple with his lack of size, specifically with his wingspan and arm length. Um, I think they're going to grapple with a lot of his sort of limited pass rush moves, and they're going to wonder, does this translate? But what goes in his favor is what you said. He's an athletic freak, and if you're betting on the athletic traits, he's a good bet. We compared him to our comp for him was the Water Boy.
do. Yeah.
When we did our edge room, yeah, I mean he plays like that. He's a throwback. He's nuts, and
Yeah.
I think he's a kind of he would be fun to watch. He'd be a lot of fun to watch. Um, but do I think he's going to go as high as these other three? It's possible. We'll see. Maybe he blows up the combine and he passes some of these guys. But right now, I would say he's behind them.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll see, man. I could go any order. Braylon Trice, I'll just mention as the last guy for the sake of mentioning. It's the only edge we haven't talked about. Braylon Trice, he's the oldest of the group, I believe. He's not quite the athlete, but he's 275 pounds, I think. He's got great pressure numbers. I mean, I think he was in the 70s last year. I think he got close up there this year. Um, 88.9 pass rush grade. He had a 16.6 pass rush win rate. So, not the best numbers, but I mean, he is another guy who has a lot of tools, speed to power guy as well. But he can beat you and counter you inside. And he's a really just good all around player. He's definitely more of a technician with that kind of relies on his strength and works off of that. Uh, Big fan of Braylon Trice. If I think he would be awesome here. I think he could be a little bit of that like Matthew Judon to this defense for Wink if he's still here.
I love Braylon Trice, man. And I do think we need more of like these kind of power guys. And he's huge. Bull in the China shop, right? That's his mentality. He attacks all the time. He's always attacking. He's unrelenting, and he's a big, strong dude. I would love him on the Giants. He's a guy that I don't think is going to fall in the second round. I thought when we did our show initially about edge rushers, this is a guy who would potentially fall to the second round. I don't see it now. It's possible, but I just think there's so much there to like that teams are just going to fall in love with the dude and just take him. I think he's going in the first round.
Yeah, man, I could see it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good conversation on the edge class. Do you have anything else?
No, I mean, in summary, it's a good group, man. It doesn't have a Will Anderson, but there's a lot of good players here. I would say after the first 5 to 7 guys, we didn't touch on all of them, but there is a bit of a drop off, and then you're doing a lot of projecting. So if you really the real solution, in my opinion, I think in Monty's opinion, to fix the edge room for the Giants is actually spend some money in free agency.
I'll,
That's the
I'll
best
al-
possible solution.
I'll also say the combine will help a lot with getting an idea of some of these tier 2, tier 3 guys. I'm sure the NFL already knows.
Yeah.
They've caught the athletes just watching the tape, but for us fans, it's kind of easier to identify where the athletes are and then go back to watch it once these combines kind of these random freaks blow them up, and
Yeah, I
edge is
mean,
one of those positions.
we'll probably do an episode as we approach draft season on the other edges and some guys to look out for. But just some names to be aware of are guys like Muhammad Kamara from Colorado State, Jonah Ellis. I mean, these are all guys who I think will eventually. He's from Utah. Like these are all guys who I think will be risers, and people will start noticing. And when you do your mock drafts as draft season approaches, you're going to see these names pop up a lot, and they've had very good years. So this is something to be aware of. But why don't we go on to our next question here, man?
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and read that one off?
Did you read the last one?
I'm not sure. I can read it. So, all right. This group
Oh no,
is
wait. It's me.
yeah,
Sorry.
you're good.
You're better at this, keeping track than I am. All right. So our next question comes from Frank Corona. I've been part of this group, but have we been unfairly harsh on Bo Nix as a prospect? Guys, I respect. Guys I respect really like him. Trevor Sikkema is really high on him, and Mike Renner recently said that Bo Nix has the second best arm talent in the class. All right, Frank, thanks for the question. You want to handle this one?
Yeah. So I think that there's a two-part of it. I think that it's been both sides with Bo Nix. I think one side has been, hyped him up to be a little bit more than he is, and I respect those guys. Like you said, like Trevor Sikkema and Mike Renner, they're really good at what they do. And, if that's what they're seeing, it's just I haven't necessarily seen that, but respect to them. But I also think there's been a side that's been unfair to Bo Nix. Bo Nix is a really good prospect. It's just you kind of have to talk about what he is. If what you're evaluating in a quarterback, what you look for in a quarterback is not necessarily, arm talent, but you're looking for guys who process the field very well, who have a quick release. And, those are the things that you're like, look, I want guys who can translate to the NFL quickly and well. I think Bo Nix, I could see really people falling in love with him. He processes the game extremely well. He has 60 plus starts at the college football level. He can move around well. He's not a statue. He can improvise, but I don't know about the second best arm talent in the class. That I think I really can't agree with as far as Renner. He works really well. If you want to say he's the second best arm talent, and I still think is a reach between the numbers, I might be able to hear you out. But as soon as we talk about outside the numbers, that's where he kind of falls down in this class when I look at him. But I really do like Bo Nix. It just has to be in the right system in my mind. How do you feel, Sal?
I think Frank's hitting the nail on the head in the way he's asking the question. Are we being unfair to Bo Nix? Because I think there's a lot of polarizing opinions on the guy, and I think that's sort of the first impression issue. Everybody remembers Auburn Bo Nix, which was a total shit show, one of the
Yeah.
worst quarterbacks they've ever seen in college football, really. And the guy goes similar to Michael Penix Jr. goes to the Pac-12, and he goes to Oregon. And he dominates for 2 years, and he's a Heisman candidate. We did, a deep dive into his tape, and we like when we did our quarterback episodes. And for those of you who watch, I know a lot of you did watch. We try to break down the film and combine it with the data. So I think Bo Nix is one of those guys where the data does more to help him, in my opinion, than the film does.
Yeah.
Um, he's a data darling. He's got insane stats and insane production in terms of yardage, touchdowns, his PFF grades under pressure, not under pressure, his turnover worthy play rates. Everything is great. He gets the ball out quickly. He doesn't take a lot of sacks. But the one stat that stands out that does show up in the tape that I think is a knock against him is his big time throw rate, which is not very high. I'm forgetting what it was. I think it was around like 4% or
4.2.
something. Yeah, it's not high. And I think his turnover worthy rate is like really low. It's like under 1% or something like that, right?
It's 1%, which is best in the country.
Right. So those two stats I think tell the best story of what you see on tape. He is hyper efficient as a quarterback. He does not make mistakes. I mean, I think I'm not saying that as a knock. You know, he is an elite game manager, is how I would describe him. This guy, he's a game manager in the elite way, and that term game manager is getting a lot of run right now, right? From the
Yeah, it
the
is.
Cam, the Cam Newton thing, but it's a good discussion. Like I think people use it as like a knock and a derogatory way to talk about these guys. It's not. Game managers understand the situation in front of them. Game managers know how to keep the chains moving. They don't turn the ball over. They make smart decisions. What you have seen from Bo Nix the last 2 years is a guy who has stopped relying on natural talent to get him through the day and really relying on what's up here, and I think that's his biggest calling card. This is his strength right up here.
100%.
The guy processes the field fast, right? We like that. We want guys who can process quickly. He goes through his progressions really quickly. He processes pre and post snap very well. We see that. Like teams throw different defenses at him. They throw different looks at him. He figures it out quickly. He diagnoses defenses very fast. And he can diagnose post snap reads very well. All of this sounds great. He has a very good arm. He has a good arm. And he will be very efficient and very accurate in the short area. But when you look into his throws and on tape and in the data, he throws a lot of stuff behind the line of scrimmage. And he throws a lot of stuff in the 0 to 10-yard range. Some of that is the Oregon offense. I think a lot of it, when you look at the tape, is just his tendency, right? He doesn't want to take a lot of chances. He likes to move the chains in an efficient way. So you can look at that as like, hey, that guy just knows what he's doing. Plug him into a West Coast system and he's going to dominate, which I think is accurate. Or you can look at it and say the guy doesn't have the arm talent to actually beat teams who will come crashing down on him and take away the deep ball. And I don't know if you can prove that part wrong. I don't have enough evidence that he's going to beat teams over the top or with, to the sidelines. When you see him throw the ball deep and you try to see him throw the ball, from one hash to the sideline, the ball dies. I mean, I think we saw that plenty of times, right? He doesn't have that arm velocity that some of these other guys do.
Yeah, I think he has a decent deep ball, but when he's throwing with touch on his deep
It's
ball, not
like
driving.
Jaden Daniels. I mean, and very
Yeah,
similar Jaden Daniels, right? Like these guys don't have like fastballs, but they have really good touch on the deep ball and fades.
and I think the difference I want to mention the difference I think with Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix is we described Jaden Daniels, although we didn't love his arm and didn't love his fastball. He's a guy who described as can make all the throws. I wouldn't use that description for Bo Nix. I don't think Bo Nix can make all the throws. I think
I
when you
agree.
start talking about making field side throws outside the numbers, I question Bo Nix's ability to make those throws.
The amount of time it takes the ball to go, I mean, he'll make the throw, but the amount of time it takes for that ball to get there in the
Trying to
NFL,
make a play on it.
yeah, that some of those plays are pick sixes in the NFL with the speed and the quickness of these DBs, right? Um, Now you can argue that Bo Nix will understand that and will not make that throw because he's smart.
He
He's
is.
really smart. So he's a difficult prospect to gauge. I would say that his what's in his best interest is going to a purely West Coast type system, a Shanahan type system. We said this when we reviewed him. I really think he's tailor made for it. You brought up the Rams over and over again. He makes
Yep.
a lot of sense for a team like the Rams. Now, they may run it back with Stafford. Hell, they may make the freaking Super Bowl the way they're playing right now. But
Yeah.
they're
Stafford's
playing amazing football. But you know, would it be wrong for them to take a shot at Bo Nix, even if they sit him for a year behind Matt Stafford, right? As a guy who's there to develop under him and take over. No, he fits that system very well. He might fit Minnesota well, although I would say that I've heard that comp, like I mean that pairing, I don't like it because I think their receiver room needs a little bit more arm talent, to be totally honest. It needs a little bit more in terms of arm strength specifically.
I
Um,
could see where you're coming from, but those are both really good route runners. I think that they would run like what Bo Nix does very well.
yeah, I mean that's fair. I just think they're used to the Kirk Cousins arm, which is It's a substantial, Kirk Cousins has a bigger arm than Bo
He's
Nix
a bigger
by
arm Bo
quite a
Nix,
bit.
but it's not like Kirk
Yeah.
Cousins has a fucking hose.
No, he doesn't, but I still think he can make all the throws, right? And he
Yes, he
can make
can.
them from
Right.
and I think that's where the limitations are. So can I see him fitting in a system like that in some way? Yeah, maybe. Definitely in a pure West Coast system, San Francisco, the Rams, teams like that. If he comes to the Giants, I think there's a way for him to be very successful, but it's going to require tailoring the offense around him.
Yeah.
In many
That's
ways, it's going to look, I think, like a better version of what we saw from Daniel Jones in 2022, is what I would describe it as. Like it's not going to be a lot of field side throws. It's not going to be a lot of, you know, pressing the sidelines. It's not gonna be a lot of, lasers into zone. It's gonna be a lot of read the defense, quick throw, short, quick passing game kind of stuff. They're gonna have to change the way they run their offense to do that.
it's not
And
gonna be
I think he
Brian
can do it.
Dable's offense as much.
It's gonna be Mike Kafka's offense,
Yes. Mike
potentially,
Kafka.
but it's not gonna be Dable's offense. So I know a lot of fans like him. I have nothing against Bo Nix. I don't think he's the best fit for if you think Brian Dable and his offense are what is going to, if you think that's going to prevail for the Giants, hopefully it does. Hopefully people don't lose their jobs. I don't think Bo Nix has the arm that they're looking for. They're going to want someone who has closer to a hose of an arm.
Yeah. I've said this a few times. I think that Bo Nix is kind of who I think people think JJ McCarthy is. And like they're like JJ has no arm and things like that. I think that's kind of like who Bo is. Bo is the game manager. He doesn't have a huge arm, but I do like Bo. I just like him in the right offense. Like I said, we've talked about it. He truly has the best processor in this draft. And I think people get caught up, including myself, about like physical abilities and things like that. And then the draft goes by and be like, oh, how do we miss on this guy? We got to start looking for guys who process the game well. And, Bo Nix is going to come in. I'll say this. I think everyone who's saying Bo Nix is their guy, I think are making a safe bet by saying that. Like when people are like, Bo Nix can be a good pro. He probably will be. I don't think he has
Right.
the best ceiling, but he's got anybody who's shitting on Bo Nix right now, he might make you look stupid pretty early on because I don't know about his ceiling, but I think he's gonna translate to the NFL game very quickly. I've said I think he has the highest floor in the class. I just don't know if he has the best ceiling.
I would agree with that. And if you're taking the guy in the second round because you decided to punt on quarterback in the first round, you can see a world where you're like, it doesn't. You and I were arguing about this earlier.
Yeah.
We were fighting. We were doing it in a much. I was doing it in a much less friendly way to Monty. I'll be much more polite on the pod. But I do see his point, which is if you didn't take a quarterback round one and Bo Nix is there at the top of round two, should you take Bo Nix or should you just punt on quarterback at that point? And I think your point is just take him because, quite frankly, he has more value than anybody else you're going to take at that position. And I think that's probably fair to say, that even though it may not be in the best interest of the team long term, if you're only taking him as a second round player, at minimum you're probably getting a solid high floor quarterback in the second round who has a trade value, and potentially you're getting a guy you can develop into something like a high end starter. We'll see. I don't think he has high end starter written all over him, but I think he has solid written all over him.
Yeah, I think he has a lot of, he's going back to the Cam discussion that's hot right now is, he's not the truck, he's the trailer. And if you put the right pieces around him, I think he can facilitate that much like Brock Purdy's doing. I think there's gonna be a lot of Brock Purdy comps that are gonna come up over time, and they're gonna use it with a lot of these late round picks. I don't think people are gonna let these game processors fall like they used to. These fast processors, game managers. I think Bo Nix falls into that prototype very well, and he moves well like Purdy does. I think in the right system, that's where Bo Nix thrives. It's just like I said, he's limited. It's you gotta. This is one point I want to mention too, and you alluded to this at Auburn. He looked like an idiot, and he was kind of playing this hero ball, chucking the ball all over the field, and he was getting picked off. And I don't think it's as much that Bo Nix has turned into a different quarterback since he's gone to Oregon. Yes, he's gotten better. He's improved. He's gotten a lot of experience. There's no doubt he's become a better quarterback since he was at Auburn. But I think that they put him in a system he can succeed in. If you take him out of that West Coast system and like those quick hitters that he's doing at Oregon and put him back into put the ball in his hands you're asking him to do what Josh Allen does, he's gonna go back to Auburn Bo Nix, I think. I think that just you saw the limitations from him physically, and he struggled. When you him to rely on his mental, his head, his brain, and just get the ball quick and how quick he can release the ball and find the open target, that's where you're going to see success out of Bo Nix. So he's limited in what you can do, but in the right system, he can be a high end player.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think he's the best fit for the Giants, but look, if we took him, I think that I wouldn't want him in the first round. I'll put it that way. And I want a first round quarterback.
Yeah,
But if they took him, if they traded up to get him at the back end of round one, or they just sat tight at round two and they got him, I think that that's probably okay. I know some people are really high on him. I would say that Brugler doesn't even have it in his top 50, and that says something about how teams probably view both Knicks and Penix, by the way.
he does have a
Um,
good Nix and Penix.
and I think I think it's probably safe to think that these guys will likely make it to the second round. What do you think?
I agree. I think they'll both likely make it to the second round. I think Knicks for some of the physical limitations, Penix for some of his injury issues, and just then they just have there's certain things outside of that, but they're I think that they'll probably end up in the second round. But maybe one of them get reached on. I see either of the two of them, but no, it Like, he's a good player. I don't want to shit on him, but it's just he's very scheme specific. Is the way I'll even say one more thing. Like you can look at a guy like Tua. I wouldn't use Tua as a comp for Knicks. Like I use Purdy. The difference with Tua is Tua has like some of the best accuracy in all of the NFL. Knicks is efficient. He gets the ball quick and he finds the open receiver and he has a great completion percentage and all that. That ball isn't getting put on like the fucking keyhole like Tua does. He often is putting that ball like a little bit behind him, a little bit away. It's not killing the play or anything like that. It's just not like elite level accuracy like you're seeing from Tua. So even though he has a big arm, he has like A minus B plus accuracy, which is still great. It's not Tua though.
I would agree. I would agree. I think
Right.
that's a good Bo Nix discussion, and we'll
Yeah.
probably be discussing him more as draft season approaches for sure. He's an intriguing prospect. All right. You got to read the next one.
Yep. So this one's from our buddy K Sexy follow him at KSIXI, one of the best draft balls on all of Giants Twitter. So if you don't follow him, go ahead and do that. But he has a two-part question for us. So we'll start with the first part. And he goes, "Who is your favorite reasonable, aka no Marvin Harrison Jr., non QB prospect for the Giants in the first round if the draft were tomorrow?"
All right.
So start with that one.
All right. So I think it depends on where you think we're landing. I think statistically speaking, we're probably landing somewhere between 4 and 6, um, most likely, and based on our schedule and what's likely to happen. So let's just put us at 5 for
Yep.
the sake of argument. Um, in my opinion, if you're not getting a quarterback of the top two, um, then what you're down to is, the two tackles. You're not so we're taking I'm assuming we're taking all the quarterbacks and we're taking Marvin Harrison out for this question. What we're
Yep.
down to is Olufashanu, Joe Alt, Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors. You can probably throw Roma Dunze in there. I think I would stop with those 5. Um, let's limit the list to that because I don't know about you, but I don't think any of the edge rushers or corners deserve to be at 5. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with you.
All right,
I think you're looking between the offensive tackles. Yeah.
right. So the 2 tackles, the 2 receivers, and Brock Bowers, basically.
Yep.
Um, I don't think that we should be investing another top 10 pick on an offensive tackle.
I
I
would
know
agree.
a lot. I think a lot of Giant fans feel differently. We've invested 2 top 10 picks in offensive tackles in the last 4 drafts. One became an All-Pro. One looks not so good, but also had to deal with Bobby Johnson. And if you look at Alabama tape of Evan Neal, he's a different human being. I don't know if he can ever be that again. But like we talked about, I think we want to try to address this either in free agency via coaching or potentially later in this draft. So I'm going to take the tackles out of this for a second. Plus, they're both left tackles. You're
Yep.
going to be asking them to do the same thing you did with Evan Neal, just switch him to right tackle. And I don't think Old Vashanu or Joel have ever played right tackle, if I'm not mistaken, in the college, right?
I don't think at the college level.
Yeah. So I mean that's even less. I mean Evan Neal played a whole year at right tackle. So what you're down to is Brock Bowers and the 2 receivers. Me personally, I would take Malik Neighbors if I'm not taking a quarterback here. And I'm not taking the tackles here. I would go with Malik Neighbors. Bowers is the better prospect, pound for pound, but he's a tight end, and we've talked about this. Like, taking a tight end this high, man, the guy has to basically become a Hall of Famer. Otherwise,
Yep.
you screwed up, and that's a
Exactly.
lot
That's
to
what
ask. Yeah,
exactly.
and
It's too
I
much to ask.
and I Brock
Can be.
Bowers is Brock Bowers is the Saquon Barkley of this top 10 group.
He is.
The touched by the hand of God prospect, right? But a lot can go wrong and all of a sudden it looks terrible. So I'm taking him off the list. I'm down to the 2 receivers. To me, then it becomes easy. I think Neighbors is the better player. Some people think O'Dunes will be a better pro. He's a very good route runner. He's a big, fast guy. He's basically DK Metcalf in many ways. He's probably a better route runner than DK Metcalf. But I like Neighbors. I think Neighbors is a guy who, if you're not taking quarterback here, you take Malik Neighbors. He's easily wide receiver 1 in almost every draft class other than this one. The guy can do everything. He can line up in the slot. He can line up outside. He has an incredible route tree that he's developed, which is still improving. He accelerates through his breaks. He accelerates through the catch point. He has multiple gears. He finds this like soft spots in zone. He doesn't drop the ball. He's always freaking open. When you watch LSU games, he's always open. It doesn't matter what they're doing. They can be bracketing him, double teaming him. He finds a way to get open on every play. This guy is absolutely a quarterback's best friend. He's sort of like Wan'Dale Robinson with like true number 1 wide receiver traits, and his ability to get open and then actually be a home run hitter.
Yeah.
So to me, it becomes easy when you look at it like that. It's Neighbors. What about you?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm right with you. Malik Neighbors has been my wide receiver too, and he is a special wide receiver. I mean, he's the prototype of the modern day wide receiver. He's that, he's like 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's so twitchy in and out of his breaks. Great route runner. All the things you said. He's a deep threat. Great after the catch. I mean, production wise, 1,545 yards on 86 catches for 14 touchdowns. He is one of the best deep ball receivers in the country. He's has a 93.5 receiving grade, 93.3 overall PFF grade. He has 3.81 yards per route run, a 90.2 grade versus man. I mean, this guy is the total package. I've said it before. He would be the top wide receiver in most draft classes, just not this one. Like there's like he he truly is one of the best wide receivers that ever come out of LSU. And I think he has the most receiving yards out of any wide receiver from LSU. That's saying something with Odell Beckham Jr., Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Jarvis Landry, Terrence Marshall, like tons of good wide receivers have come out of that school. And I think you could argue Malik Neighbors, at least full career wise, might be the best. Maybe not the best prospect. I would say that would still get Jamar Chase, but I don't think he's as far behind as he probably is getting credit for. But I'll say Roma Dunze, who is another year older, he's a senior. It's funny, like you comped him there when you're talking to like DK Metcalf. Like it's funny because physically, like I see where you're coming from. Like, I mean, this guy is a special wide receiver. I think he runs like in the he runs a 4.34. He has a 4.19 pro agility shuttle. He has a 37-inch vertical. Like he's 6'2, 216 pounds. Like he's a big guy and he's an athlete, but dude, this dude's a route runner too. This is one of the best route runners in the draft too. He's a total technician at the wide receiver position. So these guys are both awesome. Malik Neighbors is my guy, but Odunze is he is a special player who really is hard to give a comp to because he does everything. It's funny. I was just thinking as we were talking here. Honestly, who I think Rome Odunze would probably get in comp to if he was in the league before is he's got a little bit of Marvin Harrison Jr. to him. Obviously, he's like not the same level as him, but the tall, athletic route runner. You just don't see those type of combinations. Somebody that type of athlete who's this refined as a receiver. So, Odunze is certainly can get the case, and I'll also throw in, not ours, but I think will be talked about as a wide receiver one is Keon Coleman's going to get some talks here. I'll say
Yeah.
I would not like a Keon Coleman pick here. I like Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman is my wide receiver. What he'd be my 4? He's a tier below these guys for me. He's not a route runner. He's a tall, athletic, go up and get him type guy, but he's not even as special as his contested catches are. He's not like an incredible elite high efficiency contested catch guy, and that's kind of his main bag. Like I think he projects well. Like you watch him on tape, you see why he's being put up this high. But the other guys, they have everything. And I think Keon Coleman's missing that route running from his game that Odunze and Neighbors have. So I think it's between those two, but I think I'm with you that I would pick Neighbors. And I think he'd fit this offense really well.
Yeah, I think he's the guy. Like if he's probably the one person that if we didn't go quarterback in the first round and we're sitting somewhere between 4 and 6, he's the one guy where I would hate that we didn't take quarterback. And I went on a thank you, Stan, for my rant that included Malik Neighbors yesterday. Set to no Vaseline. But that was not a knock on Malik Neighbors. I love Malik Neighbors, the player and the prospect. I just really feel like we need to be going quarterback. But if we didn't, Neighbors is the guy. Like if we were sitting at 5 and took any with Neighbors on the board, didn't take a quarterback and didn't take Neighbors, I'd probably be legitimately like throw my remote at the TV pissed at that point. I because I really think this guy's going to be a top 10 NFL wide receiver. I really
Yeah,
believe that. And that would
yeah.
be like, if you're not going to take a quarterback there and you have a chance to take a guy who has that kind of upside, you got to take him.
He just
Um,
looks like every great NFL wide receiver has come in the league
he
recently.
really does. He's got it, you know. And we talked about this, and I asked you a question: would it shock you if at the end of the at the end of their careers, Malik Neighbors had a better career than Marvin Harrison Jr.? And you said no, it wouldn't shock you, right? Even though Marvin Harrison Jr. has the potential to be a generational, one of the best ever, there's a world in which maybe he doesn't achieve that level, and Neighbors ends up being the better player. That's how good he is. That's not a knock
Yeah.
on Harrison. So. Second part of your question. Give me your deepest possible draftable sleepers. I'm going to let you go first because I've been racking my brain trying to come up with a good one for KSI, but I got one for him. So why don't you go ahead?
All right, get sexy. I got one for you. I got I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna bring up a West Virginia player. You know, that's where I had to go back to that well. But
Uh,
I promise you, this one is worth it. Because I'll say, I don't know why this guy is such a deep sleeper. It doesn't make sense to me why I don't see him any mock draft simulator. I don't see him on any draft board. I don't understand why. But his name is Beanie Bishop. He's a cornerback for West Virginia. He's 5'10", 185 pounds. He's a fifth year player. He was at Western Kentucky. Then he transferred to Minnesota, and then he just transferred to West Virginia this last year. But Beanie Bishop leads the country with 20 PBUs, according to NCAA.com, and it's the most in the country. He is the 13th consensus All-American in West Virginia history. He's a consensus All-American at cornerback, and he's not on draft boards. Make it make sense. He had 4 interceptions this year. When you watch him play, he suffocates wide receivers. He gives them absolutely no room. He is all over them at all times. He's a guy that, despite being at West Virginia for 1 year, he's beloved here. Like, I mean, he's declaring for the draft. He's a senior. There's no doubt in his mind that he was going to play in the Duke's Mayo Bowl versus North Carolina. He'll be playing in it. He's recruiting like players to come play at West Virginia, even though he's not even going to be here. Like, he's really embraced the school. So I love him for that, but it ultimately says just about how much he's embraced them, how much like a team and organization type guy he is. Some of his numbers: 75.7 PFF grade, 76.5 coverage grade, 76.4 tackling grade. So he's really solid all around. Obviously, he's a little bit of an older guy, being a fifth year player. Not the biggest of guys, but I mean, 20 PBUs is some ridiculous fucking shit, man. Like that. I mean, just look when you look at cornerbacks, you look at ball skills, you can get your hand on the football that often. I mean, he needs to be getting more attention. He should be on draft board somewhere, and he's not anywhere. It doesn't make any fucking sense to me. So yeah, that's my guy. Go Mountaineers. What about you, Sal?
all right, I rack more. I was going to give you some guys, but the question said the deepest possible sleeper, draftable sleeper. So I'm thinking like 7th round, 6th round, like everybody's falling asleep on Saturday kind of
Yeah.
sleeper. All right, and I got a guy who a few of us were talking about in a space not that long ago, because he pops on tape, and it is Braden Fisk, the defensive lineman from Florida State, number 55 Florida State. So if you've been watching Florida State games, you've noticed this guy, 6'5", 297 pounds, eats up the middle of the line, and he just plays with his hair on fire. And you watch. I mean, I saw him trying to watch Jared Verse, and you see 55 constantly in the backfield causing problems, constantly making tackles, constantly harassing the passer, and you're like, who is that guy? Well, here's who he is. He's a senior citizen of a football player. He's a 6th-year player. He played 5 years at Western Michigan before transferring to Florida State this year. In his 6th year, he logged 444 total snaps, 263 in pass rush, 181 in run defense. So he had 263 true pass rush snaps. He had an 81.2 overall PFF. I'm sorry, 72.9 overall PFF grade, 67.9 run defense, and a 73.5 pass rush. Here's what's interesting, though. He generated 28 total pressures, 6 sacks from the interior D line, and he had an 8% pass rush win rate, which is really good for an interior defensive lineman at his size. Nothing elite, but you want a guy on day 3 who causes problems and plays with like a nasty motor. Braden Fisk from Florida State. I think this is a guy. There's a chance he's a UDFA in this draft class, especially at his age. But if you want to take him in the 6th or 7th round, I do think this is a guy that somebody can take a flyer on. And he's going to be the kind of guy that's showing up and popping on the screen next year, causing some problems at minimum as a rotational interior defensive lineman. But he has the size, he has the speed, he has the pass rush repertoire of a good interior lineman. So that's my guy.
There you go. All right, so always good to talk some deep sleepers here, and all of those get fun, especially the deeper we get into the draft season. So as always, I'm sure that's where KSX is already at. He's already through his top 150, so he wants to see where we're at with our
Yeah,
deep sleepers.
that's number like 287, but that's fine. All right. So let me do the next question then.
Yep.
This one comes from our buddy Kurt, our philosophy PhD candidate. I believe is this the same Kurt?
Yeah.
Okay. Could you provide tiers for this QB class? Something like 1, obvious first round grade. If you don't agree, you're unreasonable and beyond the pale. Thank you, Kurt. 2, first round grade. Dable Shane should be fired if they pass up. 3, first round grade. Okay.
We could alter these a little bit. It's Kurt being Kurt. Love you, Kurt. But use them as a general guideline.
I like the categories.
Yeah.
But why don't you jump into this first, and I'll join in after you've had a chance to tackle the
Sure.
first part of
So
this.
let's start with 1. I think this one's clear. He goes, obvious first round grade. If you don't agree, you're unreasonable beyond the pale. I think the clear one is the first tier is Caleb Williams and Drake Bay. I think that's just a tier of its own in this draft. After those guys is the drop off. I know there's been a lot of hype for Jaden Daniels. I think it's everybody's taste. If you put Jaden Daniels in that top 2, then fine. That's great. Like that's how you see them. But those 2 should not be dropped into another tier. If you want to put somebody else with them, that's great. Like that's just taste. But I think Brugler put it a good way when they asked him a little bit about this, because he's like Mays is number 1 guy, and they asked him about Daniels as like number 2 over May. He's like, look, that just shows like different teams have different tastes with these guys. But he's like, I'll say this: I never seen Daniels as QB1. I've seen a lot of teams with May and Caleb as QB1, but never Daniels. So like he can get moved up to 2 somewhere, but those guys are the only guys I've seen as QB1. So I think those are the clear top 2. What do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, it's the top 2 and everybody else in terms of that specific grade class. Yeah.
All right.
So first round grade, Dable and Shane should be fired if passed up. So because the next one is just first round grade, I think there are 5 guys who, in my opinion, should have first round grades in this class. I know you're going to disagree with me on this. But in my opinion, I have 5 guys who have first round grades. But if you're going to define the second part of this as first round grade, Dable and Shane should be fired if they pass up, assuming we're drafting in that 4 to 6-ish range, I think there's only 1 guy right now who meets that criteria, and that's probably Jaden Daniels. I think this is his category where he's not in that top tier, but if he's on the board and you view him the same way, I think all these other scouts are now beginning to view him as like this borderline top 2, top 3 quarterback in this class who obviously had a Heisman season, put it all together. If you view him that way, yeah, you should be fired if you pass up on him. I agree.
I don't want to say go as far as fired, but I will say that like he's the one that's gonna like get the most rise out of fans, because it's like like we're big JJ McCarthy fans, but there's a good chance that they pass in JJ McCarthy and he could be sitting there in the 20s. You pass in Jane Daniels, you'll probably go 6, 7, 8, something close enough to piss fans off. Like, why the hell didn't we just do it? You got picked right there. He was right there for us. Why didn't we take him? So I agree with you. I think Jaden Daniels is the one where like the production's there, the hype among analysts and teams and all that. Like, I think that there's enough there to just say, like, look, like, we need a quarterback. Like, there's enough to like about this guy. The profile fits. Like, let's just go take him because like it fits what we're looking for. He fits what they know everything they look for. He's got like the athletic profile and all that type of thing. So yeah, in that definition, he's a tier of his own. If you're just looking at guys who um, I think you could argue would not be a reach here. I think that there's a world where JJ McCarthy can put himself there, especially with a good playoff performance. He might not be there yet, but I'll mention that one in there.
Yeah, I would agree. To me, Daniels is, and I think I'm not going to change my assessment of him just because everybody else is super high on him. I'm high on him, but I'm not as high as others. I will say that.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, but that doesn't mean I don't think he's a very good quarterback prospect. I think at some point you you said this was your quote. You just draft good players, right? You don't
Yep.
overthink it. And a guy's playing really good football and putting it on tape and showing you that he has all the requisite athleticism and all the talent and all the production. You don't need to dissect it too much further at that point. You just say this is a good player. He immediately improves my quarterback room to a high level. Just take him. So
Yeah.
he's I think he's the only one who fits in this category personally.
I think, that's kind of how I got to with him is like, yeah, maybe he doesn't like check all the boxes I personally look for a quarterback, and maybe so he'll be a little bit lower for me. But at the end of the day, he's found ways to be one of the most productive seasons by a college quarterback ever. He's highly graded by a lot of people I respect, and at the end of the day, he's willed that team to victory. He's showed up in the biggest situations, and he's been, one of the most explosive quarterbacks we've ever seen at college level. And that's what are we lacking on this team? Explosive plays. That's what he does. So, um, yeah,
Yeah.
can't. So I'm all in on Jane Daniels, even if my evaluation may be a little bit less than others. I trust everybody else, and I trust the production. Let's ride. But number 3, just simple first round grade. How do you put that?
Yeah, I have two guys here that are not in the first three, JJ McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr. And I know that's going to differ with a lot of opinions out there. I do not have a first round grade on Bo Nix. I have a second round grade on Bo Nix. I The reason I differentiate Penix from Nix is simply because of the arm talent.
Mhm.
I think Michael Penix Jr. is clearly a cut above Bo Nix when it comes to arm talent. When you incorporate the ability to use accuracy and understanding leverage and touch with arm strength down the field, which is something Bo
Yeah.
Nix does not have. He doesn't have that in his repertoire. Like he has good touch passes, but he doesn't have the kind of the howitzer that Michael Penix Jr. has. Michael Penix Jr. is the best in the class at escaping pressure in terms of not avoiding sacks. He's not a scrambler to run, but he doesn't take sacks. He had a sack, I think it
No.
was at 7 or 8% pressure to sack rate, best in the class. He's consistently like that. He has a tremendous pocket presence, tremendous feel, gets the ball out quickly, reads defenses. Doesn't take a long time. His time to throw is around 2.7, 2.8 seconds. So he controls safeties. He's a very, very advanced passer. To me, that's all that adds up to a first round grade. You have to diminish it based on his age and his injury history. But I'm going to go ahead and say that you can't really incorporate that fully without knowing what his medicals look like right now. And they may be perfect for all we know right now, right? It's not going to be perfect from his history, but I think just looking at the player, he's a first round graded quarterback, which I don't have for Bo Nix. To me, JJ McCarthy is definitely a first round graded quarterback. I think he shows all the requisite skills in terms of arm talent, arm strength, processing speed, accuracy, the ability to create with his legs, the athleticism to scramble and throw, the athleticism to scramble and run, the speed to run, a powerful arm. He has every tool you could imagine, and he has produced just not to the volume that people want him to. And that I personally think that's purely a product of the Michigan offense. Some people counter with, well, how do you know it's because they don't think he can handle a more robust passing game? And I honestly don't have an answer for that, right? We don't know. But I've been watching Michigan football for a long time, and I can tell you that offense is running exactly how it's been running for years, but
Yeah.
well before JJ McCarthy. This is just how they run their offense. So I think talent-wise, age-wise, projectability, he easily has a first-round grade. So those are my two first-round graded quarterbacks that are outside the first two categories. What about you?
So yeah, I personally I think I'd have a fourth group here because I think round one, straight round one, I think I only have JJ McCarthy here left. I think
That's
JJ
that's
is
fair.
he'll be if he doesn't go round one, I think it's a mistake. I think he is a first round quarterback. He has all the tools. I don't have a lot of questions about JJ McCarthy. He could throw a touch more. He's inconsistent at times. The offense doesn't fully show him off. I'll say if anybody's looking to watch JJ McCarthy tape, go back and watch TCU last year. It's a really good game to show you kind of both sides of JJ McCarthy. He throws a couple picks in that game, which obviously not a great look for JJ, but they kind of had, with Blake Corum out, they kind of had to open that offense up and kind of let JJ be the guy. And he nearly battled back and won them that game. He made a lot of plays with his legs, get out, run, and make a pass. It was a really impressive showing. It's really one of the only times we got to see that from JJ McCarthy. It's not his best game he's ever played, but it it's really the only game where you get to see him be the guy. So it's a good one to watch. But um as far as Bo Nix and Michael Penix, I mean, I do have Michael Penix as my next guy. I would put them both in around 1 to 2. It'd be like first round to second round, and that's where I'd have them. Michael Penix, I'm not as high as you on. I think a big factor is I really value athleticism in a quarterback. I think just the way the league is moving nowadays, I think you see guys who are less mobile in today's game, but these guys have been around for a decade now at this point. I think it's gotten to the point where how athletic defenses are and how quick teams are pulling these young quarterbacks that if you can't use your legs to succeed early on, unless you're in a great situation, it's kind of hard to. And he's very advanced mentally, but it's still like you still have to kind of like get to that next level and experience of picking up the NFL speed and things like that. And it's kind of hard to get there without the athleticism to really kind of create for yourself unless you have a great offensive line. So that's one. That's what worries me the most from a personal aspect. Um, I think his accuracy could be better. I don't think it's bad or anything like that, but I don't think he has the especially on like touch passes, I don't think he has the best touch accuracy in this class. Uh and then the injury thing. The injury thing is kind of worries me. He has a ACL in both knees. Any ACL injury at this point is a second ACL injury, no matter what knee it happens to. And that's worried me a little bit. All that said, he's still first, second round. I mean, you said all the things you like about him. I agree with all those things. He's a very good passer, and I'd happily take him at the end of the first or early second. Bo Nix, we talked about him enough earlier. He would be behind Penix for me still, but he would still be somewhere like 20 to 50. It's basically kind of where I kind of put that range, and I would put him in there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think what you're describing is probably the more likely way that would shake out on grades. But since we're giving our personal grades, I would actually I think I differ just a little bit, really just on where we place Penix, but it's a fairly small difference. I think we both feel like he belongs somewhere in that 20 to 35 range as a
Yeah,
draftable
you're towards
player.
the end of the first round tier, and I'm kind of in front of the first to second.
Yeah,
So
and a lot of that's going to be dependent on whether or not teams want to trade up and stuff like that. It's not going to necessarily be like absolute value, but I think that's sort of how we view these guys. And I think after those guys, I really do think there's a bit of a drop off. I think next guy
Ewers
on the
is
list.
one other guy you can mention, probably first, second, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, Ewers is a guy who I think should. There's no reason Ewers shouldn't be in our first round grade. That's on him. He should be
Yes,
here right now.
yes, I agree with that.
When
Okay.
I say that, I mean like the guy was the top recruit in America when he came out. He has every tool you could imagine. He's big, he's strong, he has a cannon of an arm, he can make every throw, he can move. He has every imaginable athletic trait you would want, and he sometimes puts it on display and does incredible things, but he's not a refined passer at all, and he has too many boneheaded plays and too many boneheaded games that, he may just be going back to school. I will say that the last 3 or 4 games, he's put together his best tape in college, and consistently, the last few games, he's got his team in the playoffs. They're gonna face Washington. That game is and potentially the 2 games, if they beat Washington, are gonna determine Quinn Ewers' fate. If he
Yeah.
has a good run here, if he continues what he's been doing the last few games, and he has incredible output, especially on the biggest stage, I have a hard time believing he's gonna go back to school at that point. I think he's gonna be told, "Look, somebody's gonna take a swing at you, you know, probably in the first round, maybe in the early second, but you're not falling beyond that point." And then if you're Ewers, like, do you go back to school and risk it to try to become like a top 10 pick
Also,
versus just coming out? I don't know.
if you stumble, you have Arch Manning right behind you in his sophomore year.
And you could be looking to transfer again or come out
Yeah.
without, like it's risky. So he's a guy that I think should be here. I think at best he earns a first/second round grade. What do you think? Even if he does really well.
If he does really well and wins a national championship, I think he could put himself just off of his talent into like the
Would you
first
place him
round.
above Mike? Would you place him above Michael Penix Jr. if he has 2 really big games and he wins a national title?
Yeah, probably. If he has two really big games and wins a national title.
Yeah, it's a good discussion. I probably wouldn't, but I
I
think it's
get that.
close. Because I think sample size matters, right? And there's a big sample of success with Penix, and there's not enough with yours. But nevertheless, he would be in that category. I think he'd be
Again,
right
it
there.
depends which team, just like it does with Penix, though, because you need a
Exactly.
good coach where Ewers is going.
Yep. I hope they answer your question, Kurt. You got the next question here from Ask Seven.
Yep. All right. How many teams in the top 15 can you see picking a first round quarterback? Trying to understand the competition slash landscape and what teams we would have to trade up in front of the Giants. What teams would have to trade up in front of the Giants to select a quarterback? So, yeah. So I listed some here. I don't know if you want to go through it and kind of what you were thinking about as far as I basically just listed any that were outside the playoffs right now.
Yeah. So, so this is our list of teams that are right now sitting out probable top 15 teams, and every one of them could conceivably be looking for a quarterback in
Yeah,
this
all the ones I
class.
listed were I took out the ones that won't need a quarterback.
Yeah. So let's start counting them. The Bears, who have 2 of the picks. So with one of the picks, are taking a quarterback, or they might be at least. We don't know yet, but they conceivably could be, should be. New England, Arizona, maybe Arizona. Well, to be seen. I would say probably not to them, but maybe.
Yeah, unless they
Um,
get the first pick, so probably not.
yeah. Washington definitely is a possibility. The Giants, obviously. Atlanta definitely should be, unless they trade or sign a veteran, which is an interesting, thing for them, the position they're in. The Raiders for sure. Seattle, I think for sure. The Jets, maybe. You had Seattle as a maybe. I think Seattle for sure should be looking at quarterback.
Mhm.
But the Jets, maybe. The Titans, maybe. The Steelers, you have maybe. I think again, it depends on if they sign a veteran. If they don't, I would say yes for the
You don't
Steelers.
think they would roll another year with Pickett?
I don't think so. So there's a decent chance Mike Tomlin's gone at the end of this year.
You think
Um,
they've been saying that forever?
I know, but it's not this time it feels kind of real.
Hmm.
And if he is, I'm sure that they would move on from Pickett.
Yeah,
If he's not, I mean, he's Pickett's the reason Mike Tomlin might get fired. So
and
um, I don't know.
that was
I
Colbert's last pick, so it's not even the current GM's, even though he was in the front office.
right. I mean, Omar Khan hasn't picked his own quarterback yet.
Yeah.
And the guy is such a good GM. It's hard to imagine he would have picked Kenny Pickett, to be honest.
Hmm.
So I think I would put them more in like the definitely category. Um, Not that they definitely would, but that yeah, they would absolutely consider taking a quarterback.
Yeah.
And then the guys that you had just missing the top 15, who are probably in the quarterback sweepstakes, depending on where they land and who's on the board, would be the Vikings, the Bucks, and the Rams. Um, the Rams we just talked about, interestingly, they're fighting for a playoff spot and they are making a run at this thing. But the question is, how many years does Matt Stafford have left? His wife has cancer. He's getting older. How
Lots of
many years
injuries.
to get? Yeah, a lot of injuries. Um, if you're smart, you want to start looking at the possibility of investing in a player like a Bo Nix, maybe a Quinn Ewers for a team like that. You could
Mhm.
see them taking a swing. The Bucks, I don't know what they're going to do with Baker Mayfield. I mean, they're in a
Yeah,
tricky
they're in a
spot with
tough
him.
spot. They're in this.
Um,
They're in the spot that you don't want to be in.
they're in where the Giants were last year.
Yep. Don't make the same
Big
mistake.
Baker's better. Baker's a lot better as a quarterback, like as a
He's
passer.
better. I wouldn't say a lot better. He's better. He's
He's
mid.
his his highs are a lot higher, I would say. As a passer. As a passer,
Sure.
he's got much more arm talent. But I agree with your general sentiment that he's mid, that he'll fool you.
Yeah.
And
It's the same
and if
mistake.
he's a tweener, right? He's a borderline starter, elite backup, kind of guy. He's going to bounce around the NFL for a long time. If somebody makes the mistake of giving him a big multi-year deal, I have a feeling most of that deal they're going to be wondering, why did we do this?
Yeah.
You know, um, so they're in a tough spot. And the
You get
Vikings,
him
I
for a
think,
Geno Smith deal, maybe, but if you pay him Daniel Jones money, that's gonna be a mistake.
yeah, anything more than like a year of guaranteed money, I think would be a huge mistake for Baker Mayfield. And then you got the Vikings, who, if you're not, they may just bring back Kirk. They may do that, but if they don't, they definitely need a quarterback to go with that room. You can't like roll the dice with nobody. They're going
Yeah.
to need somebody with some talent. I've always thought Michael Penix Jr. is a perfect fit for them. But I think that's it. So I mean, that's like half the damn league we just named. You
Yeah,
know,
a lot of teams could take a quarterback. So, what team do you here's a question. What team, why don't even say, or like would trade up if they were in position to take Jaden Daniels, let's say, would
right,
they take him? So,
right,
like,
because every one of these teams would take May or Caleb or May. So let's take them off the table.
yep.
Um,
So,
but so who would take Who the Bears take Jaden Daniels to replace Justin Fields?
I don't think so.
I agree. Would the Patriots take Jaden Daniels?
Yes.
Yes. Would the Cardinals take him?
No.
Would the Commanders take him?
I think it's leaning yes with the Howell bench. I mean, I think Howell might play again next week, so it's not
I
guaranteed. But new ownership, new coach. I think
I
yes,
I think they would strongly consider taking Jaden
yes, I
Daniels.
agree.
I really do. Would the Giants take him? Hopefully.
They should.
Yeah. Would Atlanta take him? I think absolutely.
Yes, I think
Would
so.
the
They would.
Would the Raiders take him? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Would Seattle take him? I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
If they
Um,
happen to be sitting there with a pick and Jaden Daniels, I think they would take him. I don't know if they would trade up for him, but I certainly think they would take him if he was there.
would the Jets take him? Yeah,
No,
I think so. You don't think
no,
so?
I don't think Rodgers would let him.
Well, okay, well, if you want to take the Jets out of it because of the Rodgers factor, that's fine. So we have 6 so far. Would the Titans take them?
No.
I think that they're going to give it at least another year of the Will Levis experiment before they do anything else.
I
So
think you could very much make the case that if you put Will Levis back in this draft after what you saw in redraft it, he might go ahead of Daniels.
mm,
I don't know if I would do it, but I'm just saying he's showing enough flashes to feel that you could go that way.
maybe I don't think so. Honestly, I don't know if I agree with that, but I don't think they would take him. Steelers, I would say yes, they would if
Yes,
they
I agree.
don't have a free agent quarterback that they add. Would the Vikings take him? Yes, that's 8.
Yeah.
The Bucks, I would say yes.
Hmm.
That's 9. With the Rams, I would say yes. So that's 10 teams. That's 10. So 10 teams, I think, on this list would take
The
Jaden
Rams would
Daniels if
yes
they were
for sure.
presented. How many would actually trade up past the Giants to get them? That's a smaller number. Um,
Yeah, like I don't even know the Rams would take him if they were in the top 5. Like I think the Rams would probably just take like an offensive lineman probably, but
all right, so let's say 9 teams if you take the Rams out of it. Um, the others are realistic. There's like 9 teams that would potentially take Jaden Daniels. I think at least 3 of those teams, if not 4, will be drafting ahead of the Giants. Um, and then another 4 or 5 will be behind. So I think what you're looking at is maybe 4 or 5 teams behind the Giants that could theoretically trade up to go past them if they wanted Daniel. So you're talking about Atlanta, the Raiders, Seattle, and the Steelers, and maybe and then maybe the Vikings and Bucks. So I mean, I was 5, maybe 6 teams that would at least consider trading past the Giants. I think that's realistic. And that's a good question because would they actually do it? I don't know, but that's a lot of teams that could potentially make the move.
it depends on the price, you know? Like I think Washington's the number 1 team you got to worry about. Like it that's potentially could be in front of us that would take him assuming we lose out. I think that's the team you worry about the most. Obviously it would be ideal situation that you end up just 4th here, and, if you want them, you can have them type of thing. You get choice at basically QB3 unless somebody wants to trade up in front of you, and then whatever, you get Marvin Harrison Jr. and you gotta figure it out from there. But, or trade out of Marvin Harrison Jr., whatever you wanna do. You have the asset of Marvin Harrison Jr. sitting in your lap, so that's not the worst thing. But yeah, we looking from there, I think Atlanta and the Raiders, I think, are definitely 2 teams that you gotta keep an eye on to see if they'd be willing to trade up and make a move like that. I don't think, Seattle would come all the way up unless they really start to lose out and get in position, but, you gotta look at the Raiders, man. I mean, they I feel like they have to make a move right now. I feel like that's what where they're at.
I,
They totally got rid of their quarterback situation. I mean, new coach, new GM. I feel like they're gonna want to make a move at quarterback.
I don't doubt that some team will try to make a move up at some point in this class because these quarterbacks are good. I think the better way to look at this question, though, is if you're the Giants and you pass on quarterback from the position you're in, all these teams we just listed, not only would they want Daniels, a bunch of them would want JJ McCarthy too.
Mhm.
And they're not going to be there the second go around.
Yeah,
And you're going to have a hard time trading back up to get past them
yeah,
to trade. So what I mean in the scenario that and we'll do this exercise at some point, but in the scenario where the Giants say, you know what, I can figure this quarterback thing out later in the first round. I'll trade back in, or I'll wait till the second. I'm going to take Malik Neighbors at 5. Right? That was the question that was asked earlier. But you want a quarterback. You're gonna have to give up a first round pick and then some to slide back into the first round to get ahead of these teams to assure yourself of a first round graded quarterback. That's the bottom line.
yep,
It's gonna cost another first. I do not think guys like Daniels, guys like McCarthy are gonna slide into the 20s. I really don't believe that's gonna happen. It's
yeah,
possible that I guess McCarthy could, but I don't think it's likely. So you're going to have to get into the mid-teens at or potentially the bottom of top 10 again to assure yourself one of these guys. So that means if you take a Malik Neighbor as number one, just keep in mind you're probably giving up next year's number one and maybe one of your seconds this year to slide back in to the first round and get your hands on one of
potentially.
these guys.
Yeah.
Well, what pick would you play it out, Monty? Like, let's say the Giants take Neighbors at 5, and you're comfortable with either Daniels or McCarthy, and you're Joe
So
Shane. Where's
so
it?
the
Where are you trying to get to?
so I think you could get somewhere between like 16 and 20 with 2 seconds. That's about where the draft points add up between your 2 seconds. So I think you could theoretically get into there without paying a first.
That might not be high enough.
Yeah, it might not be, but I think that's ideally where you're targeting if you're coming back up for a quarterback.
And so the tricky part of this is if you have conviction in a quarterback where you're willing to trade back up into the top 10 to take him, the correct move is not take Malik Neighbors
Oh
and
yeah, if you're coming back in the top 10, do not do anything other than
don't
take quarterback.
just take your quarterback.
Yeah,
If you don't have top 10 conviction in these guys, but you like them and you want to play the board and you have strong conviction in a guy like Neighbors that you want to get him on your team, then the play is really take the position player in Neighbors and then set sort of a number and like I'm willing to trade up to a certain level to get these guys and we'll see where they fall, which shows that you don't have a ton of conviction. But hey, the Ravens did this in 2018, right?
yeah,
They took
play
Hayden
the
Hurst at
board.
25. Yeah, they took Hayden Hurst at 25 and they saw that Lamar didn't go in the last few picks and they traded back up to 32 and got Lamar and they got an MVP. So
Yep.
it set their team up for a decade. So I mean, I think that you could theoretically play the game like that, but you're probably not playing it unless you're trying to play it for the back half of round one,
Yeah.
right? And that's the way to look at it. So it's tricky. I think the short answer is there's a lot of teams that would be willing to move around to get their quarterback. There's a lot of teams that'll sit still, and if the quarterback falls to them, they'll take them. Um, all of these roads lead to me having one conclusion, the one we keep banging the drum for, which is just take your quarterback. Find the quarterback you like and just take it. Make it easy on yourself.
So we have one. We'll go have one more question here, and I think it kind of just goes off of what we were just talking about, so we can hit it pretty quick here. You know, if we go position with our first round pick, would you rather package our second to come back up for the first to get the fifth year option, or just pick them with this your second round pick? And that's from
That's
our
a,
buddy Radical.
that is a good question. Um, to me, I think the value, if you're talking about just pure value, that fifth year option is right now worth what, like 23 million or something like that for a quarterback versus what that quarterback would theoretically make on the open market or that you'd have to pay him, which would be closer to 50 million. So let's say it's like $25 million in value. Um, hard for me to imagine a second round pick being worth $25 million in value. Um, and that's how I'm looking at it. So my answer is if I have conviction in the guy and I want him, I'm getting back into the first round. I want that fifth year option. I'll give up the picks to get him. What about you?
I agree. I'll throw one caveat into here. Like I said, like JJ is a guy that I like a lot, and I think is going to be a first round pick. And if you're coming back up for him, I think you're paying for the talent and you're playing for that fifth year option. I'd pay both seconds to do that. I'll say a guy like Michael Penix, or I guess even like a Quinn Ewer or the Bo Nix, whoever it is, who I'm more of a first, a second on, I would probably pay to get that fifth year option, but I wouldn't be dropping top 50 picks to do it. I would drop one in the seconds, maybe a third, whatever it
Yeah,
takes. But I wouldn't drop both just to get the fifth year option.
I think that it won't cost both to get into the back half of round one for these guys.
Yeah, not like
You're
25 back, probably.
right. Yeah, I think you're looking at you'd probably have to give up that first, second, and a day three pick or something like that, right? Or maybe in a third in the future or something
Yeah.
like that.
Two day three picks, too early day three picks or something.
Something that you're not going to miss too much.
Yeah.
It'll suck to not have that extra pick, but not, I don't think it'll be too painful. Having that extra second round pick from the Leo trade is really key. It gives the Giants some flexibility here. If
Yeah.
they had just traded Saquon Barkley, they would have had another day two pick.
Yeah.
But I digress. But the short answer, Rad, is I would try to get back into round one and get my guy because I think the value of the fifth year option is substantial. And in terms of pure financial value, it cannot be underestimated. Like you're assuming the quarterback you're taking is going to be good. You're assuming you're going to pick up that option. You're getting a cheaper deal for 1 year than you would get. And it also gives you negotiating leverage with him to extend him. So I think it's valuable. I guess the counter to that would be if you're going to pick up the fifth year option, you probably already worked out an extension with the guy,
Yeah.
right? And then does it really matter? But if he's good enough to pick up the fifth year option, even if you're not sure what you're doing, a la Justin Fields, that guy's going to get you back a second round pick in return anyway, somewhere down the line. So I think it's
Yep.
worth making the move. I think the upside is worth it. Would you agree there?
Yeah, and just also just securing. Make sure you go get your guy. Like
Yeah,
that's the other aspect of it.
right. So I'd probably give up like a second and a third or something to get that pick. Absolutely.
Mhm. So, I mean, the last one here, I don't think we have to talk about anything. We pretty much nailed it. I just want to shout him out. Christopher Tony, and our YouTube commenter last one said, edge rushers and wide receivers in your next mailbag, please. I think we talked about edge rushers a lot, a good bit of wide receivers. If you have any other, players within that you want to hear about, DM us, let us know. I'm sure we'll do another mailbag episode too. But appreciate you giving us a question for the mailbag and responding, comments in the last video. But yeah, that's all of them. That's all our questions that we got.
We got through them in our usual very brief 2-hour pod.
Yeah.
So we got through it. Uh, but no, listen, we appreciate you guys saying the questions. They really sparked some good thought process and debate. We hope you enjoyed the mailbag. We'll probably do more of these as time goes on. We're going to keep things going. We're going to definitely be circling back to some position groups and prospects as we approach draft season. It's going to be upon us sooner than you know. Um, just some minor stuff. This is minor, unfortunately. The Giants do play on Christmas Day. They play the Eagles. Um, so we'll probably be talking a little bit about that. And I'm not really paying attention to Tankathon, but I think, like we've mentioned many times in this episode, chances are we're landing somewhere in that 4 to 6, 4 to 7 range, based on what will likely happen with the outcome of these games. You can't tell, but I think it's something to pay attention to. Who's above us, who's below us. There's no big games this week, but uh, the college football playoffs are getting closer and closer. So remember on New Year's Day, you're going to have the semifinal games. The semifinal games are going to be Alabama versus Michigan and Washington versus Texas. All the bowl games happen before that. There's a ton of them. I'm not going to go through all of them unless you want to go through them, Monty. But
I'm all right.
I, you just sit down and enjoy your bowl games as they come one by one. But do you have any closing thoughts here?
Oh man, just draft season's here. So be back here and we'll keep giving you guys some good draft information. We're looking forward to breaking
We
it
got a
all
lot.
down with you guys.
We got a lot of work to do to go back to each of these position groups and finding what we got to find. So yeah.
Ready to get back
Anyway,
into scouting.
with that, thank you guys. Follow us at He's a Giant Pod. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Follow me at Queens_guy. Follow Monty at MONTECRI5TO. With that, you guys have a really, really awesome holiday, whatever you celebrate. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy late belated Hanukkah, whatever. But happy holidays. We'll catch you guys later. Go Giants.
Go Giants.